Hello chaps, welcome yet again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. I do hope you're well. Now then, one of the questions that I get asked by a lot of my students, if not all of them, is, so what music do you listen to then? What's your favourite guitar music? And really speaking, the answer varies depending what day it is, really, what sort of musical phase I'm going through at any given time. But if I were to pick my 10 favourite guitar tracks, then I suppose it would be these. Okay, these aren't really in chronological order, more just the order that they popped into my head as I was putting this list together. But undoubtedly the first one on this list is really my first guitar memory, really, so to speak. Certainly one of the things that swung my decision to want to learn to play the guitar in the first place. I'm from the northeast of England, as I may have mentioned, and back in I think it was the mid to late 70s, around 76, 77 time, our local TV station, Tyne Tees Television, did a sort of a retrospective about music that had come out of the area, and they played a very famous black and white piece of footage of a certain band playing this. Yeah, obviously House of the Rising Sun by the Animals. And just that guitar intro, I don't know what it was, there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and it's like, I want to be able to make that noise. And within not very long at all, I'd got my parents to order my first ever guitar from the great Universal Stores catalogue that everything came from in those days. Many years later, I actually got to meet the guy who played that fabulous guitar intro, a fella called Hilton Valentine. By this time he was playing on the northeast pub and club circuit with his kind of blues rock band called the Alligators, and we played the band I was on at the time played on the same bill as him, and I met him and told him that he was the reason I played the guitar, and I've got to say, what a gentleman he was. So there you go, that's the first guitar memory I really have. Let's move on to number 2. Okay, this is really 2 tracks, this one. It was a single, which was an A side and a B side. And we're going to go for the A side here, but I'll tell you about the B side in a moment. This really is the pair of songs, or really the song, I suppose, which got me into jazz and blues. I didn't realise that's what it was at the time, because this band were marketed in the early 80s as a rockabilly band. Here's the lick that I'm talking about that just made my ears kind of perk up. Of course, it's Stray Cat Strut by the Stray Cats, featuring the marvellous Brian Setzer on guitar. Just that lick there. What's that all about? There was nobody playing guitar certainly in the top 40 like that at the time. I've since worked out that it's based upon something called the whole tone scale and an augmented chord. And just that really fired up my imagination to seek out things that sounded a little bit more exotic and unusual sounding. Now the B-side of Stray Cat Strut was a live track, I believe recorded at Newcastle City Hall, called Drink That Bottle Down. And if you've never heard it, go and search it out on YouTube. It is one of the best examples of powerful, slow blues that you will ever hear. And again, I'd never heard anything like that. Brian Setzer was 22 years old when he recorded that, and just go and listen to it. His guitar playing on it is absolutely stunning. If you think that all Brian Setzer does is kind of jangly rockabilly sort of stuff, then listen to Drink That Bottle Down. It's just a powerhouse blues guitar performance. Check it out. Anyway, let's move on to number 3. Okay, another one from the late 70s, and any guitarist who was kind of learning to play at the time will undoubtedly have had some influence by this track, simply because there was nothing else like it around at the time. It's another one of those that just stood out from the crowd, as it were. Here's the very famous intro. Of course, it's Sultans of Swing. Yeah, Dire Straits have never been cool. You know, especially when we got into the whole kind of money for nothing era in the mid-80s, and that's when I started to kind of go off them a little bit, because that whole Brothers in Arms album just, it sounds really dated now. I think there's too many cheesy synthy sounds on there. But you go back to the early albums, the first album especially, with Sultans of Swing, In the Gallery, Wild West End, Down to the Waterline, all that sort of stuff. It still sounds fresh, and it still sounds, you know, like it could have been recorded yesterday. Yeah, what can I tell you? There was nobody else who sounded like Mark Knopfler at the time. He was still is a unique voice on the guitar, although I've got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of the stuff that he's done in recent years, but that first Dire Straits album, and especially, you know, kind of all that sort of stuff, that's still in regular rotation on my MP3 player to this day. So there you have it. Let's move on to something a little bit beefier sounding, shall we? There's a TV presenter who hails from this part of the world, the northeast of England, called Eric Robson. No relation, I don't think, anyway. And back in the early 80s, he used to front a local, I think it was Tyne Tees television TV show that was a sort of a regional current affairs programme, and for some reason they chose this as the signature tune. And that was the first time I'd heard Layla. Very shortly after, it actually got re-released as a single and did okay in the charts, and you know, I was just mesmerised by that sound. That was the first time I can ever really remember liking anything that got, at the time, classed as heavy rock. So, you know, I bought the single when it came out, and then for that Christmas, I think it was either Christmas or birthday, I got like a Best of Eric Clapton album, because I used to play this this single a lot. And from that I discovered Eric Clapton, and yeah, the rest, as they say, is history. So there you go, local TV again informing my guitar playing career. Okay, fast forward a few years from Layla, and we arrive in the mid to late 80s, around about 1987. I was at college at the time, and a few of my friends played the guitar, and you know, we used to kind of get the guitar magazines and, you know, kind of talk guitars basically. And the whole guitar playing world round about then seemed to be going nuts for this whole neoclassical metal style, you know, Yngwie Malmsteen, Tony McAlpine, Vinnie Moore, all that sort of stuff. And you know what, I love that, but it didn't really influence me as a player. I had the albums and I listened to them and enjoyed them, but it never really set my world alight, until along comes this guy who seems to have listened to all of the same records that I listened to growing up, because you can hear the blues in his playing, you can hear the rock and roll, the Chuck Berry licks and so on, that's going on in his guitar playing. But it was still undoubtedly part of the whole shred movement. And this is the first track of his that I ever heard. Obviously, Surfing with the Alien by Joe Satriani. As you can see, I've adopted the same haircut as him. Anyway, yeah, it was that whole album really, that there wasn't a whiff of Bach or Paganini about it, that made me realise you didn't have to be able to play violin caprices on the guitar um, and sound like you'd gone to some sort of conservatoire music school since you were 5 years of age in order to be able to be a good guitarist. You know, there was still room for this whole kind of good old-fashioned bluesy rock guitar playing that could be turbocharged in the way Satriani did it. I wore out my first vinyl copy of Surfing with the Alien, and it was around about that time when we were all sort of migrating from vinyl to CDs, and I think I'm correct, if my memory serves me rightly, I think Surfing with the Alien might have been the very first compact disc I ever bought. So there you go, Surfing with the Alien by Joe Satriani, big influence on me. Let's move on to the next one on the list. Okay, I mentioned the Stray Cats earlier on, Stray Cat Strut. Not long after Stray Cat Strut, they did a record with, I think he was their producer at the time, Dave Edmunds. They did a version of an old George Jones country song called The Race Is On. And I didn't know anything about Dave Edmunds at the time, so as you do, I kind of hunted him out. I mean, I'd heard the odd chart hit that he'd had, I suppose, like Queen of Hearts and Girls Talk and stuff, but I didn't really know much about him. So, as you do, I went out and bought a Dave Edmunds Best Of album, and I still remember it to this day. Track 1, Side 2 was this. Let me see if I can pull this off. Yeah, that was my attempt at Dave Edmunds' version of the, I think is it Kachurian or Kachurian piece called Sabre Dance. If you've never heard it, then please do search it out. Notwithstanding what I said about neoclassical metal kind of not really being my entire cup of tea earlier on, I'd never heard anything like this, and I think that's a common thread that runs through all of these choices that I'm making. It's all stuff that just took me by surprise, really. Just the idea that, you know, this guy with long hair and a kind of rock and roll electric guitar was playing a classical piece and really making it rock as well. That just really appealed to me for some reason. It's credited to Dave Edmunds and Love Sculpture, I think, if you're going to go looking for it. I really recommend that you do. Apart from anything else, it came out in about 1970, 71 or thereabouts originally. Obviously I discovered it much later, but you know, that's probably the earliest example of neoclassical rock guitar that you'll find. Anyway, moving on to the next one on the list. Now this next tune is, well, frankly, it was a difficult choice. The reason why it's a difficult choice is because when it comes to Gary Moore, who I'm going to be talking about now, I could literally have filled up this entire list with tracks of his that, you know, have stayed with me over the years. I just really, really loved his playing. Again, it was that same thing that appealed to me about Satriani. It was fast rock and roll guitar, but it didn't sound too schooled. It just seemed to come from the fire in his belly. Big fan of Gary Moore, it has to be said. And I had a real problem choosing just one of his tracks to put on this list, but if I have to pick one, and I do, it has to be this one. Obviously. My favourite version of that track is one that doesn't exist as far as I'm aware. I went to see him on the Still Got the Blues tour in, I think it was, well, that'll have been 1990, I guess, at Newcastle City Hall. I was about 3 rows back, and he was just on fire that night. He came out at the end of the gig and did like a couple of encores, and the very final track was The Loner. It started off with just him and Don Airy on keyboards, and then the band gradually sort of joined in and did an absolutely barnstorming, about 20-minute version of it. Yeah, what a tune. I first heard it not on the Wild Frontier album, which it appeared on, but a little while before the Wild Frontier album came out. Tommy Vance, remember him? The Friday Rock Show on the BBC played, I think it was either a Gary Moore special, or certainly there was a Gary Moore live gig as part of that week's show, and this was the track that I think he played at the end of his set, much like he did at Newcastle when I went to see him. And it's just one of those jaw-dropping moments where you just, my God, what is that? I've never heard a melody as beautiful as that. And, you know, obviously with Gary Moore, you've got both sides of the coin. You've got the kind of achingly beautiful melody, and then when he kind of opens the taps a little bit and really gets into his stride with the shredding, it was just, it's like the earth stopped turning on its axis. It was that powerful. So yeah, that is my choice for a Gary Moore track. If I can only pick one, it's The Loner. Anyway, moving on. Okay, I mentioned the Stray Cats a couple of times already. That Stray Cat Strut lick, you know, the kind of that one, when I play it right, that was sort of my stepping stone into the whole world of jazz and things that sounded a little bit exotic. And round about that time, my music teacher at school, a guy called Mr. Coffey, sort of knew that I was getting into this slightly kind of weird sounding stuff, and he gave me a Maxell C90 tape. Yeah, everybody under the age of 30 is going, what's one of those? Anyway, on this cassette there was an album called Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell, and again another one of those moments that just takes you by surprise. There was such an air of quiet menace about the first track on that album. You know, up until then, anything that sounded a bit menacing usually meant that it was kind of big and angry and heavy metal and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But this was just so understated that it was, you know, a bit scary, but in a good way. The track is called Chitlins Con Carne, and it goes like this. And it was that chord, that 7#9 chord, that, you know, I mean, most people's introduction to that chord is, I guess, you know, Purple Haze. And yeah, I mean, obviously I've kind of knew about it in that track, but I think my first recollection of that chord was hearing it on Kenny Burrell, Chitlins Con Carne. It comes from, as I say, the album Midnight Blue. Well worth checking out if you like, if you like good bluesy guitar playing. Forget about the whole jazz moniker if that sort of thing scares you a little bit. Stevie Ray Vaughan actually did a brilliant cover of this track. I think it was on the posthumous Sky Is Crying album. So that's well worth checking out as well. But that was my first encounter with it, and yeah, it's one of those tracks that stays on my MP3 player to this day. Anyway, let's see what's next. Okay, in 1984 I'd just left school and gone to college, and there was a big buzz in all the kind of music press and on shows like Whistle Test on the TV. I think it was Whistle Test by then. I think they dropped the old grey part of it. About a new album that was imminently coming out by this guy called Bruce Springsteen. And I knew the name, but I'd have been hard pressed to put any songs to. Actually, the only Bruce Springsteen song I knew was a track by Dave Edmunds called From Small Things Big Things Come. Again, a great track, well worth checking out. But I didn't know of The River, I didn't know Born to Run, I didn't know any of that sort of stuff. I hadn't been made aware of it at the time, in one way or another. But, you know, Bruce Springsteen, everybody was talking about this album, and then suddenly Dancing in the Dark was in the charts, you know, Courtney Cox in the videos, we all know now. And yeah, I quite liked it, so you like the single, you take a chance and you go out and buy the album. And I think it was the second track on the album, second or third track, Darlington County. I mean, straight away, the fact that it's got Darlington in the title, which is, it's the name of a town near where I live, so that made me gravitate towards that track to begin with. Yeah, just the guitar sound on that, it's just like, that is such a nice sounding guitar. It just sounds so rock and roll. And well, here's the riff. If I can play it right. And you know, that is the archetypal sound of a Fender Telecaster on the bridge pickup. And to this day, if I'm trying out a Telecaster guitar, that is the sound that I have in my head. If I can get that sound out of it, and not all Telecasters do it particularly well. Some of them are a little bit too refined, I find, nowadays. They don't just have that kind of grittiness in there that makes it sound authentic. So yeah, that is not only one of my favourite tracks, it's one of the first tracks I heard by Bruce Springsteen, and it's one of the tracks that sort of influences me when I'm thinking about, do I want to buy this guitar or not? If it can make that sound, I tick the yes box. If not, I move on and look at something else. Speaking of which, I think it's now time to move on to the final tune on this list. Right, the first album that made me realise that an album could be more than just a collection of singles and B-sides and other songs that sort of stitch it all together was The Wall by Pink Floyd. It was the first time I ever realised that an album could tell a story from beginning to end. Still not entirely sure what the story is, but you know, it's definitely a story. Like before, what happened was with the Bruce Springsteen track I mentioned earlier, I liked the single, you know. And something just seemed appealing to me about a song that shouted, "We don't need no education," especially when I was 12 years old. So yeah, enjoyed the single, went out and bought the album with some birthday money or Christmas money, and the first track on the album is just probably one of the best first tracks to any album that you could ever imagine. As you probably know, it's called In the Flesh, and it goes like this. You know, it's just so bombastic in the way that it opens the album. It's like, okay, pin your ears back and listen to this, we mean business. And you know, there's not a week goes by, I don't think, when I don't listen to that album from end to end. It's just a masterpiece. and that track is undoubtedly, especially when it's reprised further on in the album, it's everybody talks about Pink Floyd, especially The Wall, in terms of, you know, Comfortably Numb and, you know, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, which was the single. And I think that's often overlooked, that track, and I think it's one of the ballsiest, most impressive opening tracks to any album that's ever been made. And yeah, I love it. So there you have it. There are my 10 favourite guitar tracks. Ask me again tomorrow. The list might be different, but I suspect it wouldn't be too different. And I shall leave it there for now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then please hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll get to see more of them. If you would like some tailored one-to-one guitar tuition, then get in touch with me via the details at the end of this video. I do lessons in person if you live on Teesside in the northeast of England, or wherever you are in the world. I do lessons via Skype, and whichever way you have lessons, your first one is free. I'll also mention at the moment that I have a couple of albums out that are available on all the usual platforms: iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, etc. There's a link in the description box below as to where you can get them. And given that you now know what my influences are, you're pretty well informed about what sort of stuff's on the albums. It's all good bluesy, rock, shreddy guitar playing, and frankly, what's not to like about any of that? Right, I shall leave it there for now, folks. I'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.